Hi, and welcome to our people, where we give space for elements to tell their stories. I'm Weylin, and today we are not going to be listening to a story. Instead, we're going to talk more about spiral dynamics. Recently, we did a episode on spiral dynamics and did an introduction, and then went ahead and started with purple and red. And so today I want to talk about blue. Before we get started, I once again want to reiterate that spiral dynamics is simply a model for understanding human psychological development. This model is by no means complete, by no means all-inclusive. It is simply one of many models. For me personally, I feel like it's a really great model for trying to understand human psychological development from a religious standpoint and how religion and religious experiences and spirituality are affected by where we are in our development. So, with that said, let's get started. All right, stage blue is also called traditional or a conformist stage. It likely emerged around 5,000 years ago, and it was associated with agrarian societies and is still seen in parts of the developing world. It likely came around at the same time as when people started growing crops. One of the big things that growing crops did is it allowed one man to feed a large number of people. Up until that point in time, people's main occupation was finding food, was feeding themselves. Most of their time was taken up with that. There wasn't a lot of time to do other things, and definitely not really occupations. So when they started growing food like that, it freed up people to do other things like become thinkers and teachers and politicians. It was a massive change for humanity to go from being completely consumed with the need to find food to being able to do other things, other jobs, and trade things for food. The stage blue was dominant during the Industrial Revolution and Enlightenment periods. Stage blue is when we see a lot of industry becoming part of the human experience. With that shift to farming, men started becoming leaders, and female leadership started to become more threatening. I am not sure exactly why that would be, other than that because anybody could farm, anybody could produce food, the roles that each one took probably started blending just a little bit. Although, an interesting statistic is that women who rode animals, such as riding an animal that was plowing or walking behind a plow all day, tended to suffer a lot of miscarriages. And so women who had to work in that way tended to not reproduce nearly as much. Okay, so the core characteristics of blue. Blue needs safety, security, and certainty. I always want to say the three S's, but obviously certainty is a C. But it's three S sound: safety, security, and certainty. And any one of those three being gone threatens blue tremendously. Blue holds its beliefs very solidly and does not really question them. The things that they believe are thought to be true. Moving into religious and moral duty, blue places a lot of emphasis on responsibilities to religion, family, and community. A lot of this often leaves them with a very black and white worldview. Blue is quite literal. They tend to interpret religious texts literally as they read them. Blue doesn't seem to understand that possibly a text was written in poetry form, and they would say, well, it says X, Y, and Z, therefore that is what it meant, and that is what is true. Because of this black and white worldview, they then really struggle to understand metaphors, and they really don't grasp gray areas very well. They have a very rigid worldview. Blue individuals would struggle to entertain or to onboard, to think about alternative perspectives. They also see failure as a personal flaw instead of a step towards getting something right. I think that most of us today know that we are one step closer to getting something right when we fail. It doesn't mean that we have a moral flaw, although I know that for myself personally, I have lived in that where I did see any failure as a personal flaw, and I hated it, and it led to a lot of problems because then actually admitting a failure was admitting personal flaws, and that seemed like it was very counterproductive, and I thought people would dislike me if I had these flaws, and so it was very hard for me to admit failure anyway. Blue individuals see their own civilization as superior. If you remember, when we were in purple, we talked about the tribe. And then, of course, it always flips tribe to ego, tribe to ego. Purple is tribal. That's even the name of purple. And so it is very tribal, but it is small tribe. It is like 100 people, 150 people is your tribe. And your dedication is to that small tribe. Then, of course, red sees the shift to ego, to self, and tribe is not so important. Then in blue, we see the shift back to a tribe, but we're looking at a much bigger tribe. We're looking at civilization, this nation, a much larger group of people. Some of the very patriotic people are probably quite blue in that area. These people see other societies, other kinds of people as wrong, sinful, possibly sinful. They see them as God surely doesn't bless them and agree with them because their God is not the same God we worship, or their version of God is not the same version we worship. And so does not really have a problem at that point, maybe being combative or dismissing other civilizations, other people, and the uncivilized as they would think of them as. Blue is also where purity culture is very prevalent. Um, Things like purity vows, purity rings, keeping yourself till marriage, ideas like that are very blue. Blue can get pretty hung up on sex in general, things like homosexuality and so on. Fairly blue ideas like preachers railing against the sins of immorality and the sins of homosexuality and so on. Very blue. Blue's challenges and limitations would include a fear of change. Stage blues are very fearful of heresy, and they would resist change. Remember, safety, security, and certainty. Change shakes sometimes all three of those, and blue is supremely uncomfortable with that. They want things to stay the same. They want stability and adherence to traditional norms. They also have a rigid dogma. They find it very difficult to question their beliefs. One of the interesting things about blue is that they would believe that anyone who believes differently than them should be very open to considering their ideas and considering something different and to looking around and measuring the validity of their own beliefs. But blue simply cannot do that themselves. They cannot question their own beliefs. That is too much for them, once again. You go back to safety, certainty, and security, and blue just finds questioning their own beliefs too dangerous, too insecure, too unsafe. In religion, this comes out a lot when you watch religions that would classify as cults. You can see that each one calls all of the others cults, but they simply cannot see that they themselves have the exact same qualities. And I find that very interesting in studying that, to see which ones of them recognize what a cult is, but have no clue that they themselves are in one. This difficulty in questioning beliefs, it will often lead to dogmatic adherence to rules of traditions. And there again, in religion, you see that a lot. Tradition meaning far more than being a decent human being or than being a humanitarian. At least you adhere to the same practice that your great-grandfather did, even though you didn't reach out to someone who you could have helped and could have changed their life. Blue takes disagreements quite personally. They find anyone who disagrees with, especially with their religion, they find them to be almost unbearable. They dislike the fact that someone would disagree with them very much. It threatens, again, some security. They may take it quite personally, to the point of maybe even feeling like they were being persecuted because someone questioned a belief. They may also just take someone asking about their beliefs as questioning their beliefs and become offended over that as well. They will become very defensive and can really get into conflict. Obviously, for most of blue people, that would not be a physical conflict, but they can get into a lot of verbal and emotional conflict with someone who is questioning them or their beliefs. On the extreme end of things, blue individuals may resort to violence if their beliefs continue to be questioned. Blues tend to hold the notion that the earth was created for their use. They would not see a lot of reason to be concerned about things like global warming or overfishing of the ocean or different things like that. They tend to see the earth as a resource for them to use and something that they don't need to worry about. My personal experience is that I believed that God would return, Jesus would come back and take his children to heaven before anything really catastrophic could happen. And since I have deconstructed some of those beliefs, it has become much more important to me to take care of what we have and make sure that our kids are going to have access to the resources this earth has, and that the resources we're using can be sustained or we can have other alternative energies or whatever. It's become much more important to me because I no longer believe that God is just going to turn off the switch right before we utterly ruin everything. I don't know if that's how most blues feel exactly, but the fact still remains that they really don't get too concerned about taking care of the earth. That is very low on their list of priorities. Blue just is not concerned about unsustainable practices and the long-term consequences for the earth. Blue has a lot of guilt if they don't feel that they're living up to their strict moral ideals. Once again, blue is where you see things like um, gay conversion therapy, the moral belief that it's their duty to stand up against abortion in all forms, and that they must do that. Once again, with their black and white worldview, they can't see that there are some tremendous nuances to abortion. Blue would fail to see that there is a large difference between aborting a full-term baby and preventing a small number of cells to continue to replicate, to remove those. The earliest stages of abortion are removing less cells than die when you scratch your nose. And blue just cannot grasp that there could be a lot of difference in that. Blue just says, oh, you're killing a human. Those moral ideals obviously would extend to other things, gender, trans issues, and so on. Blue is also very fearful of being excommunicated. They see their safety in the group, and to be threatened to be removed from the group is terrifying and almost unthinkable to a blue. Once again, religion can use this quite heavily. We see it all over. We see it in the Amish and the Amish shunning, and we see it in Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, and of course we see it in the Holdeman Church as well. There is excommunication because it is so debilitating to a blue. It is used as a tool and almost as a weapon to make people conform to what leadership thinks they should be. Okay, so moving on. So examples of stage blue cultures would include like Puritan America, nonviolent fundamentalism, and certain religious or scouting organizations would exemplify stage blue values. Historical examples would include patriarchal systems and societies, especially where female leadership was suppressed. Beliefs and thought processes of blue, God and authority. Individuals would believe in God-appointed leaders. They would prefer God-appointed leaders over democratically appointed leaders. They would feel that it's wiser to lean towards a theocracy than towards a democracy. One of the reasons they would do this is because they don't really question themselves, and they don't question their beliefs. And so if they feel that God has appointed that leader and God is not questioned, well, then they cannot go wrong with that leader. And I think, once again, without getting too political, I think that you can see certain people saying that today. Well, God appointed this man, and so he would be the best leader. He should be president. He is the only one, and so on. The issue with that is that they are not actually coming to that rationally. They are simply not questioning, well, probably not questioning any part of it, but they're not questioning God, and they're not questioning whether God actually appointed that leader. They just simply believe those things, and so they support that person 100%. They would also believe that because God appointed that leader, that that leader then has divine authority, and what that leader says, even if it seems wrong, even if it seems immoral, even if it seems like it doesn't make sense, because that leader was appointed by God, he has divine authority, and therefore he must be listened to and obeyed. Moving on to God and how they see God, they often see God as male, and they see him as separate from the creation. God existed, and then God created the creation. They often have a very hard time explaining who created God or where God came from. They often just have an explanation like he just always was. But the fact of it is that, once again, they're just holding a belief without any rational thinking behind it. How Sage Blue sees the Bible, they, once again, are interpreted as literal truths. They believe that God inspired the Bible, and they believe that the Bible, because it is the word of God, it is literal and contains everything they need to know to live life. They believe that it contains the truth. They find it difficult to question the Bible. Although that's not entirely true. They find it difficult to question their interpretation of the Bible or their translation that they use. They can question other people's interpretation or other people's translations all day long, but they find it unacceptable to really question their own. They probably like digging into it and like studying it, but they study it in a way that deepens their own belief, not in a way that brings them into questioning it. They would believe that the Bible is the ultimate source of authority. And now the concept of sin. Sin is viewed as disobeying God or harming others. They would also have a strong focus on penitence and on making things right. They would believe that the only way they could be saved is for Jesus to have taken on that sin on himself. The penal substitution is strong with blues. I guess that's not strictly true. Obviously, a Muslim who was blue would not believe exactly the same as a Christian blue. So, or a Buddhist or whatever. So saying that a blue believes that Jesus has taken on himself is not true. But they would believe in some sort of atonement theory where, some figure, some being takes that sin and removes it from you, but suffers for it himself. Jesus and salvation. Jesus is seen as a personal savior from sin. With that shift into being a personal savior, he is now more like a companion to God and not so much a second God or a punitive Jesus anymore. He's more seen as being someone who's on your side and someone you can talk to, and someone who would possibly help you understand and get along with God. Heaven and hell are still emphasized as being quite literal, or very completely literal. They would still believe that heaven is a place you go when you die, and hell is a place that the evil people go. Later stages, of course, start to see hell as maybe a state of mind. Hell is where we are when we are out of alignment with ourselves, when we are not being true to ourselves, or when we are in tremendous suffering. We are then in hell in later stages views. Heaven would be something similar when we are in alignment and we are taking care of ourselves and other people, then we are in a place of happiness and contentment, and that's heaven. I think it was Rob Bell who wrote that hell is absolutely real. He's been there. He's seen it. He has been in countries where he was watching starving children look for food, and he said that is hell. Um, but Blue still sees hell as a literal place for people who aren't part of their nation or their civilization or their religion, their interpretation of the Bible, whatever. There's a lot of different standards that are held up for judging whether someone is going to hell or not. Blue is the color, the stage of law and order. Blue societies value order, stability, and hierarchy. They often side with law enforcement and military, even when things are obviously going wrong. They see that in much the same way as they see God or a pastor or a leader who is appointed by God. Sure, maybe mistakes were made, but that person is still an authority, and surely if everyone else had behaved rationally and behaved in a way that seems rational to the Blue, well, then nothing bad would have happened. They would find it very hard to see that there could be some biases in law enforcement or in the military, and that there could be some very unsavory people being part of that. People who definitely are in the wrong and who have committed atrocities. It's interesting to me to go through this because I can very distinctly remember times in my life where I lived these things, where I could watch almost any law enforcement video and I would become angry at the person they were arresting. Even like an auditor who was trying to make sure that his First Amendment rights were being upheld. I would be like, why does he have to act like that? Why does he have to antagonize the cop like that, you know? And so I felt very strongly that way. People who are very pro-military are often blue. There is probably two reasons for that. They back the military, and they also believe strongly in their nation, in their God, in their agenda. They feel very strongly that they are right, and because of that, they would back the military on multiple levels. Blue has a real fear of being wrong. Individuals that are blue would fear making mistakes. That would lead them to rigidly adhering to authority. Something interesting about that is that Blue believes authority even when authority may be somewhat abusing them and somewhat misusing them. And yet Blue, because they're afraid of making mistakes, adheres to authority, and in doing so may even be making a mistake in that. But they fail to see that. They fail to see that the authority they're adhering to could be making a mistake, and by extension they could be as well, because they just believe that the authority is right and doesn't do wrong, even if what they're doing looks wrong. Blue can be quite exclusionary of people who do not conform to their standards. Their standards are often quite rigid, and they can see those who are not conforming to them as being impure or dangerous. Once again, if we look at the American system, we'll see people who just inherently seem to believe that all Muslims are dangerous. And we know that not nearly all Muslims are dangerous. Not nearly all Muslims are jihadists or terrorists or whatever. But because a few have been, Blue fears the whole group because the whole group is different than them and doesn't conform to their rigid standards. Stage blue, parenting and social behavior. Stage blue are strict parents. They have high expectations, and they often expect their children to behave like adults. There's a focus on perfection and control. I lived through a childhood that was definitely highly stage blue. I know that my parents expected us to behave like adults. In my early parenting days, I also would have parented in quite a stage blue. I found it very difficult to realize that a 3-year-old was 3 years old and that there was simply no way that that child had the same amount of knowledge about life that I had. I would look at that child with disappointment because how could have they made that decision? I mean, I knew better. And it took a lot of work on my part to realize that that child did not know better. The child didn't know everything I knew. Somehow I felt almost a sense of shared consciousness. That child should know what I know, and so I can expect it to behave in the way I would have behaved. And looking back, I think that's probably what my parents thought or felt and parented off of, because that's the way it felt to me as a child. I was expected to behave as an adult. My father would expect us to treat the furniture in a way that would make it last as long as possible. You know, things like playing The Floor is Lava were just unacceptable. I mean, that was so obviously hard on the furniture. How could you ever be dumb enough to play something like that and to jump around? There were spankings promised if that kind of behavior was caught. Another thing that just comes to mind is drawing in the frost or in the condensation on a vehicle window. My dad could not abide that. If you drew a heart in the window, you got in trouble. You got yelled at. My younger brother, I would say, probably developed a complex over it. He started to believe in his childish way that somehow that permanently devalued the vehicle, lowered the value on it. And the interesting thing to me is that then as I became a parent, that was something I had to really work with, was to not become frustrated when my children drew in the frost on the window, because it was just wrong and everybody knew it was wrong. And I had to work with myself to allow them to do that, to allow them to be children. As I have developed more, that expectation of the children to be adult-like has dropped off some. It's something I still probably have to work with to some extent, but I'm thankful that it's not as bad as it was. Corporal punishment is still common in blue. I think that it's fair to say this probably translates into how a blue sees God, and sees God as behaving towards his children, sees him as punishing anything wrong, harshly punishing something wrong, painfully punishing something wrong. Moving to punishment and authority, parenting emphasizes obedience to authority, and the consequences for disobeying or deviating from the norms can be quite harsh. A blue can really struggle to have compassion. They can struggle quite a bit with people who are dealing with addiction or mental health issues. The blue will focus very heavily on stopping the actions, such as drinking more or taking a substance. They'll focus on stopping that and completely forget that a much more effective method is to focus on why that person feels the need to medicate. I think it would be fair to say that blue still sees mental health issues as the fault of the individual. They would tend to think that likely the individual did something to bring about the issue, and that by extension they need to pay for that thing because they did that, because they brought that on themselves. They obviously somehow the mental health issue was brought on by themselves, and it's not wrong for them to pay for that issue. And once again, they completely forget that it's much more effective to figure out what the issue itself is and where it came from than to deal with the actions and the consequences of whatever happens because of that mental health issue. They would just become much more focused on dealing with the outward signs of the issue, not what's going on inside. Blue can face developmental challenges, as we all can, but Blue's challenges would include a rigidity in growth. They can become bureaucratic and authoritarian, and that ends up hindering growth, innovation, and inclusion of new perspectives. They can resort to violence and extremism. In extreme cases, stage blue dynamics can lead to genocide or violent fundamentalism. The Ku Klux Klan, a lot of hate groups are very stage blue. Many authoritarian or fundamentalist groups are stage blue. Once again, stage blue has difficulty with compassion. And to add to the addiction and mental health issues, social issues can be added to that. They have very little compassion for someone who may be gay or trans. Combining what we said about mental health and addiction, they would probably tend to think that the homosexuality or the trans issue results from something that person did. Obviously, we know that's not true, but Blue would think that, and then think that, and because of that, they would tend to feel that mistreatment of that person is somewhat justified because that person did something to become this way. And also things like gay conversion therapy would be more justified because in their minds they chose to be that way. They did something to be that way, and so therefore taking steps to make sure they're no longer that way are justified in their eyes. Now we move into what it takes to transition out of stage blue. Once again, a reminder that as we move up, we want to include the good parts of the previous stages. We don't want to just drop everything. We want to include what's good about blue as we move into orange. And once again, a reminder that no stage is better than another. There's just simply where we are at. We can't judge others for the stage they're at. I think it's fair to judge them for their actions, but it's also extremely helpful in how we think about people and in how we deal with them to remember that these stages exist and that those people are at a stage, and that to some extent that dictates how they feel about life and about the world. Obviously, people are still very responsible for the way they act and for the atrocities they may commit. That is still completely their responsibility and can be punished and be disliked about them. But remembering where they are and what stage they are can be very helpful in dealing with them and in helping them to transition if they are ready. Let's remember, we cannot transition somebody that is not ready to move up. Pushing them to transition, to change, to ascend into the next color will usually only push them back deeper into the color that they're in, into the stage that they're in. So all of that being said, transitioning out of stage blue and into orange. Okay, so transitioning beyond stage blue. One of the big things for transitioning out of blue is to start studying. Blue is going to find it really hard to study because that starts challenging its thinking and challenging the way it believes, and blue finds that really scary. But they are going to have to face that to be able to break through the ceiling and into orange. Understanding the differences between blue and orange is really helpful. Understanding how different people look, studying other lifestyles, studying other cultures, other civilizations, nations, thinking about what it'd be like to be an Iraqi citizen and have the United States come in and invade and end up killing over 1 million people there through the course of that war. Can kind of comprehend what it feels like. That's really helpful to realize that there are other parts to other feelings, other people, other ways of life, other experiences, that other people experience the world very differently than you do. That's really helpful in stage blue, to move out of stage blue. Another thing to remember is that, as in any transition, but especially blue to orange, that can be brought about. Transition is often brought about by, well, and in fact, some people would say is always brought about by either great suffering or great love. I think that probably suffering is the more common one. We find ourselves bumping up against some real issues, and it's challenging us, and that suffering is what tends to make us start to transition into the next stage. I think that great suffering can involve a death in the family, a divorce, loss of a job. There's a lot of things that it could be. Losing your wife and kids because you've been working so long hours, and you've been just slaving away and working, and that pain can cause you to ask yourself, what else can life offer? And you can start to move into another stage. Great love is also helpful. One thing that can be really helpful is if we can show love to somebody who's in great suffering. Just remember that preaching to them will never help. Approaching them in their great suffering and trying to show great love and trying to preach them into the next stage will usually drive them deeper back into the stage they are in. Something that's interesting is that showing a blue great love or unconditional love, they will not understand it and they will not accept it. But because they can't accept it and can't understand it, they will often go away from that interaction and think about it, and that can be a catalyst. That thinking can bring about some realizations that help them to start to ascend and start to move up into orange. Once again, remember that if you are green or yellow, you cannot move blue into green, into yellow. Blue has to move into orange. You cannot skip a stage. So don't try to make blue like you. You would be best off taking some time to understand the stage that blue needs to move to, and then helping them make that transition. A little bit of personal experience here. I think I was pretty heavily stage blue when I was in the church, and then through leaving the religion and going through a divorce, that was a real motivator for me to start transitioning into orange. I moved up. I did a lot of studying at that point in time, and I think that between the studying and the pain and the restrictions that I was starting to feel, I moved, a larger part of my psychological makeup into orange. That was about 5 years ago. About 4 years ago when I actually would have made most of the transition. And now recently I went through a breakup and had a lot of different life experiences. Part of that was working on this podcast and making some friends there, some really good friends. So I think that there was a mixture of great suffering and great love. And I think between the two of those, I have begun another transition. And once again, here I am studying spiral dynamics. And I think that's fascinating. Just remember as we move that everyone has their own methods, their own story, their own way of moving. And remember to give grace to everybody else and let them move in their own way and in their own time. I know I mentioned trying to understand other worldviews, other cultures, and so on. And another thing that can really help with that is to actually travel, to experience other cultures. It's really hard to demonize other cultures when we are experiencing them and we are feeling what they live through, and we are living what they live through and experiencing alongside them. That is very helpful. One of the reasons to remember to be compassionate and give great love to a stage blue is remember that they're moving out of their safety, certainty, and security, and that is incredibly fearful for them, and they definitely need some reassurance during that time. Let's talk about some of the positive aspects of Stage Blue. Stage Blue are very loyal and faithful. Despite having limitations, a Stage Blue person will often bring a sense of stability and loyalty and community focus, particularly in difficult times. I know that in my experience coming from the Holdeman Church, I know that it is said that Holdemans do funerals, deaths better than anyone else. They band together in a with a sense of community at those times better than almost anyone else can, and it can be a very heartwarming experience to go through a very difficult and sad time like that, and to experience that community and that drawing together. And I think that that is one of the aspects of them being quite Stage Blues, that they do that very well. Stage Blues often have a strong work ethic. They usually work hard and sacrifice. One of the problems with that is that they can work very hard in a somewhat mindless direction. They can just keep working, moving forwards without really understanding or checking to see if they're moving in the best direction. This strong work ethic, working hard and sacrificing, it can really benefit societal growth and also their personal development. Blues also respect tradition. Emphasis on tradition, family, authority can really help the way that they band together and create community. Blues, once again, have a strong sense of community and can create a very solid community with a strong base, and that is often what can attract people to a Stage Blue religion. Okay, so in conclusion, remember that when we transcend, we must transcend and include. The ultimate goal is to transcend out of the rigidity of Blue and to keep positive values of personal development and to foster an understanding of beauty and strength, the beauty and strength that each developmental stage contributes to the general human experience. That concludes my Stage Blue overview. There's obviously much more to learn, but that is just hitting the high points of what Stage Blue looks like, especially as it regards religion. I think that some discussion on Stage Blue and how it looks and our experiences in Stage Blue, especially as it pertains to our religious experiences, is very beneficial. And so, yeah, I would encourage people to think about it and to maybe talk to other people who are experiencing some of the same things, and to see what we can learn from studying that stage. I think that's all I have to say. So thank you for listening, and I hope this has been worth your time. I have really enjoyed working on these, studying these, and talking about them. And I hope that anyone who is listening enjoys listening as much as I've enjoyed talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.